Chapter 10. I found the door and walked out into the mist and through the damp fog. To my surprise, there, parked across from the entrance to that dreadful club, sat a black limo like a large bird of prey hovering with its motor humming. The limo long and sleek, looking as if it was waiting for its next victim. But in this case me, and yet, I strode up to the car unafraid, because I didn't know enough to be afraid. And because I trusted Paige, and that was another mistake I would make. A strange pale blonde with white hair, clean-shaven, as if he couldn't grow a beard to save his life, stepped out wearing a black suit. His gray eyes bored into me. I should have been afraid, however, for some strange reason, I wasn't. Looking at me, he opened the door, and I watched him, and I climbed into the car with dark windows. When he entered the car, he pulled out, and I yelled, "What's going on?" "I'm waiting for Paige." "You know Paige?" "I thought everyone knew Paige." He didn't say a word. He peered at me in the rear window, and careened in and out of traffic at high speed as I tried to question him. "Where are you taking me? You know this is kidnapping. I could have you arrested." I tried all the tactics I had heard of on television, when you think you're being abducted. Now was too late to cry out. I had climbed into that darkened car driven by a man who would scare any adult male, let alone a young woman. But I had gone of my own free will and at the insistence of a dear friend, Paige, who promised me that she would be right out. After a half hour of pleading and sometimes scream for the driver to stop and let me out, he pulled the car up to a pair of black iron gates and stopped. By that time I had calmed down because what was the use anyway? I was committed to this ride, and I had to ride it to the end, and hopefully it wouldn't be my last ride. I glanced around at the property, if only to look for a way out. There were other limos parked in the circular driveway. Good, I thought. There are witnesses. Things don't happen when there are others around. At least I'm not alone, I thought when I saw a carload of young women exit the limo and laughing. They must have needed women at this party desperately to try kidnapping me. The girls I spotted didn't mind at all. I relaxed, sat back and straightened my shirt. Tucked a pair of stray hairs behind my ear. I was trying to look on the bright side, but there were no bright sides to my predicament. None I could see at this point. The driver opened the door and I stepped out. Looking to the front and side at the large paved circular driveway, and up at the enormous old mansion that had been refurbished to look new. There were guards stationed around the home and at various entrances. They had no guns that I could see, and they wore black, but even I knew they weren't there as greeters. The kind you see at Walmart. They were young with dark hair and pale skin. It never occurred to me that their skin wasn't the result of the dreary, overcast weather. They stood stiff, and their faces were without emotion, as if they were programmed like robots. I passed one, and his only reaction was a twist of his nose as if he smelled something strange. I raised my arm casually, checking, thinking I hadn't used deodorant. I didn't notice anything different, except I may have gone overboard with the shower gel. After seeing what looked like a team of these dark-haired, pale-looking guys at every perimeter of the mansion, I concluded that there wasn't anywhere I could run to get out of that place. If the first group didn't catch me, the second group of men would. I plodded forward to the front door with the driver at my side. When I turned around to walk back to the limo to get my purse, I realized that I had left it in the taxi, not the limo. I hadn't missed it until now, because I held my iPhone in my hand as if it was an extension of my arm. It was my lifeline, and no one could pry it out of my hand, at least not until I was dead. Looking at it, there were no calls or text messages. I slid it into my jacket, because I didn't want anyone to take it from me. Riding around with that strange man, all I could think about was an escape route, and that wouldn't be possible until the car stopped. Well, it had stopped. With weak legs and shallow breath, I turned in a circle as the guards watched me with curiosity, knowing that what I would try would be futile. I decided to approach the door and get this over with so I could go home. The door opened without anyone knocking or ringing the bell. When it opened, the driver mysteriously disappeared from view. I didn't hear him leave. I didn't hear his footsteps before. He was as silent as a crypt full of the dead. Someone knew I had approached, even though no one called the person who opened the door. Standing before me, a well-dressed man with a smile on his face. As I walked into the house, all eyes turned to me. They were the faces of the most attractive people, but all had one thing in common. They had this pale skin, and they were dressed in the most luxurious black clothing. They were paired off too, the men sitting with women. The women were dancing with men. If a man had pale skin, he danced with a woman youthful, warm, alive looking. And so it was with women. It looked like the dead with the living. I inched into the room and gazed around. My eyes were taking in everything I could. I wanted to remember what I had seen, to report this to the authorities in case it became necessary. That's if I make it out of here alive. This place was out of a dream with the high ceilings and sparkling chandeliers, but the chandeliers had no bright lights but were dimly lit. The area reminded me of a funeral parlor, with the floor-to-ceiling, hunter green velvet drapes and ornate furniture. As my eyes moved upward and to the stairs, walking down the stairs, a beautiful, handsome, magnificent specimen of a man strode slowly down with his dark eyes roving over me from head to toe. At one point before he reached the bottom step, he stopped and smiled. It was something about his smile that reminded me of Ashton. The same mouth and even teeth with the two incisors slightly protruding as if they wore braces, but for some reason their incisors appeared to reject the braces. He moved as if he floated on air. Holding out his hand and showing a broad, gracious smile, he stepped before me and said, "My name is Morgan and you are Dakota. Paige told me all about you and I'm not disappointed. I hope she didn't tell you too much. And she's wrong if she said I was looking for a date. I have a friend. Paige loves to talk," he said, walking me around the room and introducing me to the other beautiful people. "Dakota, these are my dear friends. This is Dakota, everyone." They turned in my direction and slightly bowed their heads and returned to their partners. The room filled with beautiful people who looked as if they rarely smiled and had little humor, and they appeared to need the nearest tanning booth or a visit to the desert. That would be the only way to bring some color to their cheeks and smiles on their faces. The younger women and men sitting and chatting appeared to be under some kind of spell. When the pale ones smiled, they also did. When the pale ones turned to look at me, they did as well. The introductions went on until he led me to a dining room and sat me next to him. The others followed and sat in assigned settings, but no one ate from the wonderfully cooked food served by handsome waiters and beautiful waitresses. It was as if the people were on a movie set, and the food was part of the decor, and not allowed to eat it, and the people were hired as background extras. They murmured to each other, looked up occasionally in my direction, and then went back to their conversations while wearing the most charming, non-threatening smiles. I didn't come to stay or eat. I thought Paige would be with me. She said that you were having a party. But this is a party, and you are the guest of honor, Morgan said, gesturing with his right hand. It's not my birthday, and I can't think of another special reason why a person I've never met would want to give me a party. You can't? He had this strange, serious look on his face. And then I noticed the resemblance. Do you know Ashton Mieres? Of course. But he never bothered to explain how he knew him. I finally took a bite of a carrot out of nervousness, and when I did, the many eyes at the table flicked in my direction, as if I was a monkey in a cage and they were intrigued by the eating and chewing of food. Then I made the mistake of cutting a thick slice of bread, because I didn't want to eat that much. I know I should have used my fingers, but I was in the company of refined people, and my mother taught me not to use my fingers if I could help it. That was a mistake, and I cut myself. A trickle of blood fell, and everyone sitting at the table turned quickly, and before I could wipe my hand on the beautiful white antique napkin, Morgan grabbed my finger and placed it in his mouth and smiled at me. It was a strange thing to do, but I knew that wealthy men were different, but I didn't know how different. A gesture like that was all too personal for me, and besides, I could get a disease like that. Open wounds would absorb anything, and the next thing I know, I could be dead or worse. There I was sitting at the table with all these beautiful, well-bred individuals, and the most handsome of them was sucking my finger and appeared to enjoy every minute of it. I pulled my finger from his mouth and said, "It's dangerous to do that with blood." "Yes, I know." He raised his hand, and a servant brought in something in a bottle. Glancing at it, I said, "What is that you're putting on my finger?" Looking at me with his amber eyes, he said, "I'm a doctor. Your cut will heal in a matter of seconds, and there will be no infection from that knife or my bodily fluids." "You are a doctor?" Paige had finally come through, but I wasn't interested in him. "Could you tell me something about Ashton Mieres?" He stood up as if he didn't approve of the question. His face changed, and then he smiled and took my hand. Facing him, he said to me, "I don't like to talk about another man when I'm in the presence of a lovely young woman. Come, my driver will take you home. I think you have to be someplace tomorrow, and you should get your rest." The way he looked at me as if he could devour me was unsettling and downright erotic. I had seen that look in Ashton's eyes. But Morgan's look was a look of promise. And it scared the hell out of me. He escorted me through the crowd of onlookers, as they appeared to measure me with their glances. We walked through several rooms and then to the massive foyer with black and white tile flooring, and to the outside where the limo pulled up to the front door. Morgan reached for my hand, and I felt the strange, eerie coolness I had experienced with Ashton. He brushed my hair aside, lingering, glancing down at my neck, and then he kissed my cheek. "I hope this isn't too forward and presumptuous on my part." "Of course it is. I would prefer you ask me next time." But he didn't look the type who would ask for anything. He was a taker. I'll try to remember. It occurred to me that he had plans to see me in the future. But I didn't think it would come soon. I gave him a quick smile. Deep down I was flattered, but I didn't know enough at that time to be anything but flattered, but I should have been frightened out of my mind. Nevertheless, I felt lightheaded and walking on air. Morgan's unfailing attention sent me soaring into the clouds and gave me the confidence I needed. His simple kiss felt as if it was traveling through my body, like electricity jolting me to life. I felt a possibility that he could be the one who would take my mind off of Ashton, so I could go about my work. "Would you have dinner tomorrow, with me?" "I'm afraid not. I have to see my parents tomorrow." "It's been a long time," I said to him as he opened the door to the car. "I didn't know your parents were still alive." And a groundswell moved from his forehead down to his smile, and his smile left, and his eyes stared past me. As I eased down into the seat in the limo, I said, "I guess Paige didn't tell you everything about me." His eyes wavered to me, and he smiled back as if his smile was automatic when he pretends to listen. He closed the door, and I watched him wave at me, and then the driver. When I finally arrived home after sitting in silence in the back of that limo, I needed to give Paige a piece of my mind. Traveling up in the elevator, I reached my floor. Opening the door, I spotted Paige sauntering around in her panties and a T-top. She had a glass of grape juice and bread in her hand. "What are you doing, Paige?" "Eating." "That's not what I'm talking about. You sent me to a stranger's house, and you had no thoughts of coming with me." I had my hands on my hips, and tried to give my best impression of being pissed with her. "Didn't it ever occur to you that something could have happened to me?" Paige glanced at me as if she didn't have a clue and said, "He's a doctor, what are you crying about, and he's good looking. He works at and owns the hospital where I'm employed. If that doctor had looked at me the way he gazed at your picture, I would have fucked him in a fast minute. He asked me if I could set him up with you once I showed him your picture. You're the only girlfriend I had, and you looked like the perfect person for him. I hope you didn't show him that picture of me in my short shorts, with my cheeks showing?" She tightened her mouth and shook her head. I took that as yes. Listen to me, Paige. I grabbed her hands and they were cold. I don't need to be set up with anyone. Are you sick? Sick. I never felt better. Look at you, Dakota. Your wound's so tight, you could break at any moment like an old watch. I was doing you a favor. You've never been fucked, and looking at Dr. Morgan, you could do worse. Much worse. Like sit around and wait for your Ashton to ask you out. For your information, he has already asked me out and Morgan too. See what I mean? Now you have two men wanting to fuck you into Sunday. You are disgusting, Paige. Totally outrageous. I raise my hand. I hope so. I never want to lose that part of me. As she turned to walk to the kitchenette, I noticed something because she had twirled her long hair on top of her head in a ball. What is that on your neck? She placed her hand across it. Let me see. I pulled her hand back and peered at her closely and said, that looks like 2 bite marks. You need to put something on it. They could get infected. You need to see a doctor because you're eating a lot and you're losing weight. Paige swung around to face me, her voice distant and hard. How can you tell? You weigh all of 100 pounds if that. She sat at the table and I watched her sway as if weak. That's nothing. The guy I'm dating likes to bite me around my neck, she said, looking up at me with cold, dull eyes. He says it's love bites, and when I've had something to drink, I don't feel it at all when he sucks on my neck. That looks like more than love bites. It looks like someone sunk their teeth into your neck. She placed her fingers on it again, covering it with her hand. Standing, I walked to her and pried her hand away and taking a better look. Those marks are fresh and they're turning blue. When you go to work, have someone look at them. Then she glanced at me, staring past me as if in a trance, reminding me of the women I had seen earlier, and she said, I like when he makes love to me and bites my neck. It makes the sex so much more exciting and brings me to orgasm quickly. I thought I could never have an orgasm until I met him. But you have all your life to have an orgasm. Look, Dakota. You don't understand. When you've been molested and moved from home to home, and molested each time by someone who is supposed to protect you, you shut down and can't feel anything. And since I've met Christian, I can feel again. When he touches my body, it comes alive, and I enjoy sex. There stood between us a long silence. Paige didn't talk anymore because she thought I didn't want to hear her chatter on about sex. She felt I preferred silence, so she stayed silent. And that had been a relief to me at that moment. Chapter 11. Sex isn't everything, I said to her. But with Paige, sex could be everything, and a way to validate that someone loved her. I guess I didn't understand. I hadn't experienced what Paige went through, looking for love, and not knowing exactly what love is. I knew that love shouldn't be painful. And looking at her body with bruises and bite marks, something agonizing was going on in her relationship. Standing and moving around, then leaning on the counter facing away from Paige, I looked out the window and said, I'm going to get some rest. I only have a few hours after traipsing all over Seattle looking for you, and doing a scenic tour of the Seattle docks. I think I deserve a rest. Talking but thinking about Ashton, I turned around without looking at Paige and walked into the living area and then to my room. Once again I woke too late with nothing clean. I opened the closet door and stood there, wondering what I could get away with. The only thing hanging in my closet was a flowered summer dress with spaghetti straps my mother bought me when I was in the 9th grade. So I pulled that beach dress off the hanger, threw it over my head, and grabbed a black old worn leather jacket that had seen too many winters in thrift shops, pulled up a pair of winter boots, dressed, and rushed into my waiting Uber cab. I need to be to work like yesterday, I said, talking to Thomas, my Uber driver, as I leaned forward. He pulled immediately into the traffic, driving a little too fast for me. You can slow down. I don't need to get there at the expense of my life. I didn't think you cared about your life, he said, talking through the Hindu music playing in his car. That night, I had him drop me at the shipyard. He glanced into the rear mirror as if he was busy, but I knew him well enough by now to see that he was more annoyed with me than busy. He was too sweet to say ugly things, or not show up when he had promised that he would drive me to work whenever I called. We have to stop meeting like this, he said with a small grin. I'm waiting for you, and you jumping out before we get a chance to get acquainted leaves me wanting to know more about you. We're not friends. You're my cab driver. You know my name and I don't know yours. He points to his license. I try to pronounce it. What's your birth name? Pronounce it for me. Abhinav. I gave up and said, we have a business arrangement, Thomas. Remember. That's all. I had pulled that name out of the air. A simple name I could remember. Okay, I'll answer to Thomas if that makes you happy. I like an American name. It's good for business, and since I'm your driver, it sounds professional. I can't afford to keep you as my driver. This might be our last business arrangement together. You're too expensive. That's because, Dakota, you have me waiting for you all the time, and you call me at all times of the night, and by the way, I'm happy to see you alive. And speaking of that, you left me on the docks. Like you said, we're just friends. And you looked like you could handle yourself. I'm glad you have so much confidence in me. Thomas stops his cab at the front entrance, but I'm in a hurry. No, go around to the entrance around the corner. Follow the signs, it says Research Lab. And that was the end of our conversation, because he pulled up to the back entrance, and after paying him, I scurried out. Then I remembered that I left my small purse with my phone in his cab. Turning around, he had the window down and leaned near the window holding my purse in his hand with a smile on his face. I snatched my bag from him and smiled and rushed away. This time I took the back entrance where I could cut off some of the time. Looking around to see if I was alone, I saw a black luxury BMW parked near the entrance. I rang the bell and the door opened, and I met the sharp gaze of Ashton Mieris looking down at me. When are you going to learn that you can't keep coming here late? I guess I made the wrong choice when I hired you. I thought because you didn't have a boyfriend, that you wouldn't act like all the other 19-year-olds. I walked past him as he stood with the door opened, giving me a lecture. Why doesn't he fire me? I didn't want that, and I tried my best not to get fired, but I kept doing these stupid things. And I knew better. I'm almost 20, I said under my breath, walking into the lab. Because he didn't tell me I was fired at that moment, I pushed past him as if I didn't hear a word he said, but I understood everything. I wanted you to work with me because you were the brightest student I've met, and I thought you were reliable and more matured. I slapped my purse into the drawer and reached for a lab coat. And Miss Bain, I thought I could mentor you, and you would enhance my research efforts to find an answer to this problem. He threw the paper down in front of me, turned, and marched away. Putting on my lab coat, I sat down hard, trying to show my displeasure with him. I opened the folder, after taking a breath of relief at not being fired on the spot. As I read the paper, I realized that this was something he believed in. His research focused on discovering a rare disorder in DNA, where exposure to sunlight will destroy the skin cells. In other words, any exposure to the sun, ultraviolet light, will kill an individual with this rare form of the disease. I read that they call these individuals moon people. Was this good-looking man stricken with this gene? Is that why he has shutters on his window to prevent light from coming into his apartment, and he works only at night? Then that would account for all his curtains drawn, and the darkness he moves around in. I've never seen him during the daylight hours. I took a deep breath, because I had begun to think that he was the vampire Elliot spoke about. I let out a loud sigh. Could he be a vampire? It sounded unbelievable, but at some point, I believed Elliot. Could these moon people be the original vampires? Hell no. I glanced at Ashton's office and he wasn't in there. I prayed he didn't come back into the lab. But before I could look around somehow, he was standing in the back of the lab working at his desk keying something into the computer program. I glanced to the side, hoping he didn't see me watching at him, hoping he had gotten everything off his chest. I could tell he was angry this time. Angry because this research was clearly essential, and he thought I could help him. He trusted me, and I let him down with my childish behavior of being forever late. I was sure there were more competent mentees, and they were far brighter than me, but for some reason he didn't want to fire me. He had every right in the world. Some of the other interns had been let go on the first day, and I managed to hold on to this position even as I became habitually late, arrogant, and stubborn. Did he refuse to fire me and send me home to get a job at Starbucks for the same reason I didn't want to be away from him, because I was attracted to him in the worst way? Or was it, as he had said, that I was the brightest intern he had met? Being near him made me feel so much better about life. Even as he was being hard on me, I could see in his eyes the tenderness of his gaze and the need for someone he could share ideas with. He was my first love, and why did I have to fall in love with an outward cold matured man like him? I wondered. And then I remembered Morgan. When I looked up again to see Ashton, he had disappeared, and I watched at him standing on the outside of the lab shouting at an intern. By the pained look on the young doctor's face, Ashton had taken his anger out on one of the male interns. When he saw me watching at him, he returned to where I was sitting at the computer and leaned over me to see if I had done everything to his specification. He made me nervous, stalking around. I said stalking because I neither saw him nor heard him coming or going. He just showed up behind me or next to me. I couldn't focus when I knew he would be there when I didn't expect. Glancing up at him, I shuddered and spoke out of surprise. "Do you know a Dr. Morgan?" I asked because I was nervous and couldn't think of anything else. His eyes shot to me. I could feel the intensity of them, as if I had asked about a known serial killer and I had plans to date him. His mouth tightened and his teeth gritted. He turned to me. "You should never ask about him again." His voice cold and irregular, filled with anxiety. "Why?" When I heard a sigh coming from across the room, I looked in that direction to see him with his back to me facing the wall, staring aimlessly at nothing. I put my head down and gazed at a blank screen on the computer. "Don't ask me why." His voice near, and he standing over me once more. He swiveled me around and pulled me from my seat, leaving me trembling in his arms. Looking into his sharp amber eyes, he stared at me. Then I felt the warmth not from his body, but from his look. He said nothing, and walked close to me, pulling me closer to him. "If you don't want me to kiss you, then tell me now, because I'm going to kiss you, as you've never been kissed before." My eyes locked on his, and there was a pleading in my eyes, and a begging for him to kiss me and bring our bodies closer. I heard his moaning in my ear. I listened to his erratic breathing in my ear. I didn't know if it was my voice or his I was hearing. I felt everything. The hardness of his muscular body pulsating against my knee as he placed his tongue in my open mouth. His tongue mingling in my mouth as he sucked it hard and long. The feeling of his embrace seized me as he brought me close to him. I felt his hardness when our bodies clashed together. I felt his pulsating rhythm thumping against my leg. I moved my hips into his. The movement of our bodies broke when he lifted me on the counter where the experiments had been performed. He wrapped his hands around my legs and pulled them closer as he braced against me on the hard granite countertop. Dash 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 dash. Slanting into me, he said, "Kiss me. Love me. Surrender yourself to me." I knew how to kiss him. I knew how to love him, but I didn't know or understand how to surrender to him. My sheer dress rolled up my thighs, and he quickly pulled at my panties with my arms wrapped around his neck. His head lowered close to my breasts as he looked into my eyes when he pulled my panties down past my knees. "I'm going to make love to you," he said, our eyes locking, his lips on mine. "Tell me now if you don't want this." Breathlessly I said, "I want this. I need this. I want you so much." I had surrendered myself. All that I was and had, I was giving it to him now on a hard counter in a lab. It may not have been the best place for a young woman to surrender herself to the man she waited for all her life, but I wasn't thinking about that hard counter. It felt like a bed of soft, downy feathers, because I was in love. "Why didn't you tell me sooner that you wanted me?" How could I say that to him when I didn't think he liked me, no less tolerated me? I may have been able to approach a younger guy, but I didn't think I had the sophistication to make a move on Ashton. Paige would have, but not me. I was still in that school of thought of my mother's generation where you don't make a move unless the man initiates it, and then you play hard to get. That would get me nothing but a virgin and unmarried at the age of 40, and there are statistics on 40-year-old virgins, I thought, as I buried my tongue deep into his mouth and unzipped his pants. He placed his large finger gently into my opening as he kissed me. I watched his eyes change expressions, as if what he was attempting was excruciating. It was more difficult for me, I thought. I was tight, and maybe by inserting his finger he felt that would make my opening more responsive to his penis. But he grimaced, not wanting to hurt me, and I tightened my grip on his back when he explored my soft tissue. "Relax," he said, as if he was a doctor giving me an exam. His finger cold and hard. "I am relaxed," I said as he met my lips. His kiss became more intense the further he probed into me, making me wet for him and needing more. "That's better," he said, exhaling and moaning into my mouth. When hardly any of his digits had entered my tight opening, as if a lightning bolt had hit him, he pulled his finger out of me and sprang backward and away from me as he stood with a disturbing glare focused on me. A look that made me feel as if I was the one doing something wrong. I thought my first encounter with the man I wanted to take my virginity would be earth-shattering, but instead, I felt as if my being a virgin had some unimaginable consequences. "You're a virgin," he said, his voice taking the sound of a man who discovers his wife has been unfaithful. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't like it was on the application," I said. "You didn't have boxes to tick off asking if I was a virgin. I didn't know it mattered to you." I screamed at him, pulling down my dress, tugging up my panties, and trying to cover all that he had felt and seen. Couldn't he see that the genie was out of the bottle, and his angry unresponsiveness couldn't put it back? I'm sitting on the counter in the dim light of the lab, aroused, and argued about my virginity. What a bummer. I didn't know it would be this difficult to give my virginity away. No one would believe such a thing, and especially not Paige, which brought her to mind in the most crucial time in my life. I had hoped the man of my dreams would make my dreams come true and take me, and he's standing there indignant because I didn't disclose to him that I am a virgin. He turned his back to me, and then twisted around and said nothing but stared in my direction, and then in a huff, he left me sitting there with my virginity intact but feeling like a fool. I watched as he disappeared into his office, where he had a restroom. No doubt to wash off my smell from his finger and body. As I gracelessly climbed off the counter, pulling my thin dress down, feeling embarrassed, it dawned on me. Why the fuck am I apologizing for being a virgin? He should count his stars that he was able to even come across a woman that he can claim as his own. Those women falling over him and hoping he fucks them have had more men than he will ever see or know about. Maybe he doesn't care. Obviously, I'm not what he wants. If that's what he wants, then I will show him. That's his loss, I murmured. One man's trash is another man's treasure. I bet Morgan would kill to have this virgin, I said as I strolled weak into the restroom and straightened myself up. Looking into the mirror, I wore this sad look. My feelings had welled inside of me, and I was feeling sorry for myself. I took a good look in the mirror. My long hair wild. My clothes are disheveled. I had learned early on, if you feel sorry for yourself, you will never get up and accomplish anything. The problem now is, how do I work for a man who has seen my weaknesses? A man I'm insanely in love with, who wants nothing to do with me, as long as I'm a virgin. I stood looking into the mirror, and then I had enough with my self-pity, and walked back with my head held high and sat in front of the computer and stared at it. There was no way I could do anything tonight. And then I saw what brought me an understanding of Ashton. At least I thought I understood. Leaving Ashton's office, a smiling nurse from pediatrics. He turned to see if I was looking, and I put my head down, pretending I was logging in the findings from his experiments. According to the timestamp, Ashton works 7 days a week from sundown to sunrise. Who can work like that? I questioned. When I thought he was heading my way to apologize, he opened the door and stood and glared at me. Then he stepped through with the door closing behind him and said, "Close up the lab and I'll have my driver take you home." "You will not." "I can get home on my own," I said in my best confrontational voice. "Very well. I have a date." His tone matter-of-factly. His voice lacked any warmth. His tone appeared to mock me and what I thought we had or was going to have. He fucked that up with his unfeeling and uncaring demeanor. At this point, I didn't give a flying fuck anymore, and if he wanted me, which I doubt, because no man runs to another woman and deliberately lets you see him if he intends to have a relationship with you. So once again, I crossed him off my list of potential lovers and potential husbands. Not that I had more than him on my list. Maybe Morgan should be added.